Coming up on Network Africa, U.S. investigators tell Reuters that they see no significant evidence to suggest a collaboration between Boko Haram and the Islamic State. And the search continues for missing Egypt Air Flight MS-804. Then later, a South Africa prosecutor asked for more funds to probe the Gupta family links with President Jacob Zuma of South Africa. Network Africa starts right now. Hello and welcome to Network Africa. I am Adeshewa Josh. U.S. officials have told the Reuters news agency that they see no evidence that Nigerian Boko Haram militants have received significant operational support or financing from the so-called Islamic State group. The report comes after the Islamist group's attack on the Niger town of Bozo, which borders Nigeria, killing 26 soldiers. The attackers claim they carried out the raid in the name of Islamic State West Africa province. Well, it is more than a year since the group pledged allegiance to ISIS. Analysts suggest that Boko Haram's pledge to ISIS is an attempt to attract recruits and assistance. And still talking security, Somali Islamist militant group Al-Shabaab claims it had killed more than 40 Ethiopian soldiers in an attack on an African Union base in central Somalia. But there is a but there. The AU mission, AMISOM, has confirmed the attack on Twitter. It says the enemy was successfully repelled. AMISOM supports the government as it fights to regain control of the country from Al-Shabaab. Ethiopia is one of 5 countries contributing troops to the 22,000-strong mission, and this is the first time an Ethiopian-run AMISOM base has been attacked. Let's get more from terrorism expert David Otto, who joins us now from London on these issues. Thank you so much for speaking to us on Network Africa.
Thank you very much.
Let's begin with the news from the United States investigators, which says there is no evidence to show collaboration between Boko Haram and the Islamic State. Is there any significance?
Yes, very important, because I think one of the most important things that we have to take into consideration is the fact that the United States, is trying to distance its practical assistance, within the Boko Haram vicinities. But what we have to understand is, if you want to isolate the relationship that Boko Haram has, that it pledged allegiance with ISIL in 2015, that is very risky. We know that the United States, had said before that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, and that appeared to be false. And equally, there was also no evidence brought forward, when ISIL actually had a very strong relationship with Al Qaeda, and at this time we're talking about Al Nusra. So it's very difficult, and very risky for us to say that there is no tangible sharing of resources between ISIL and Boko Haram. We know that, yes, they pledge an allegiance, which is very different from pledging support. But we also know that because these groups share a common ideology, they are not kind of an official organization that you can actually tell whether they are sharing men and resources, like other official businesses. So it's risky to actually have that kind of assessment.
Right. So, analysts all around the world, security experts like yourself, have also made mention in the past and even now of regional collaboration between most of these terrorist groups. Is it very unlikely that in this situation, information is being shared?
It is not very unlikely. What we have always, said is that Al-Qaeda and ISIL, they have the same ideology. They may have different ways of carrying out their attacks, but they have one similar ideology. So we're talking about all these terrorist organizations, including Al-Qaeda, ISIL, Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab. They all share information, they all share logistics, and sometimes they even share tactics, on how to attack various targets. So it's very difficult for analysts to say that they may be different in their ways that in their ultimate names and how they carried out these attacks, but they are all the same. But what we do not see is countries actually collaborating as much as these terrorist organizations are collaborating to tackle these groups. So there is a kind of a difference in strategy by different countries because of individual interest. But these very groups that we're talking about, they collaborate very much. So I think we also have to be collaborating in terms of how we tackle them.
Right, and you, like you have just mentioned right now, made mention of collaborative measures, practical measures of countering these terrorists. What
Yes.
measures would you suggest at this time?
I mean, what we have is an over-concentration with using military tactics. What we do not have is that countries do not really collaborate at the practitioners level. So we have the military perhaps sharing information within national and international framework, but still within that setting, a lot of countries are withholding their intelligence, and they only share those intelligence when it benefits them. But what we do not have in terms of information sharing is practitioners at ground level who are working directly with communities that are affected. Because if you share information at the very top and then you do not share information at the community-based level where people can be able to then share challenges and share their various experiences, then you will have a situation whereby everybody is trying to do the same thing but in a different way. So I mean, there is need for that collaboration, not just within the intelligence and security architecture, but within communities and practitioners who are actually doing the work. But for now, we don't have that happening in practice.
That's right. Thank you so much, David Otto, for sharing your perspective on these issues. Hopefully, there will be more collaborative, practical support for our intelligence community. Thank you. Still talking security, people displaced by the Boko Haram insurgency need to be protected by the countries within the Lake Chad Basin. Nigeria's Vice President, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, made that appeal at a regional protection dialogue in Abuja. Meanwhile, the United Nations Regional Humanitarian Coordinator for the Sahel, Toby Lancer, believes state authorities need support.
Ambassadors? At this regional meeting, which has brought together heads of government and security of Lake Chad Basin countries and donor countries, international and humanitarian organizations, the task at hand is to review common concerns about the protection of populations affected by the Boko Haram insurgency in the region, particularly refugees and the internally displaced. The United Nations Refugee Agency, UNHCR, mainly involved in humanitarian intervention in the region, is wary of the new humanitarian challenges in the Lake Chad Basin as victory mounts over the insurgency.
It's violence, it's the erratic, arbitrary nature of conflict. It's the kidnapping that takes place. It's the family separation, it's the lack of documentation. These are all indeed protection problems. And if, for instance, documentation is not addressed, there is a huge issue about access to services. There could even be a risk of statelessness.
But there is a need to pay attention to some issues now, such as the fast demographic growth in cities harboring displaced persons and possible implosions that may arise from the long-term challenge of displacements.
Forced displacement of poor rural communities to urban settings. The long-term challenge is how humanitarian actors and development practitioners can collaborate to manage the city of Maiduguri, to manage the trade challenge, the infrastructure challenge, how to get all these kids in school. Because the governor of Maiduguri, or of Borno State, I should say, his real challenge is that Maiduguri has grown from 1 million people to 2.6 million people overnight. And many, many, many of these people will not go home.
Notwithstanding the numerous complex protection challenges in the region, Nigeria Vice President Professor Yemi Osinbajo says the Lake Chad Basin governments cannot afford to fail.
If, as it is, the expectation and hope of the millions who have entrusted power into our hands, we rise to the occasion, rally ourselves, friendly nations and compatriots in the development community, this looming darkness will only be the precursor to a glorious new dawn. We simply cannot afford to fail.
Comprehensive action plans for all levels of government of affected countries are expected at the end of this meeting, as well as a map of international support towards responding to the most urgent needs of these affected populations. Omelogo Nadi Channels Television News.
There's more to come on Network Africa. When we come back, the search continues for missing Egypt Air Flight MS-804. We have the latest in just a moment.